All right, we're continuing our video notes for chapter 15, dealing with Darwin's theory of evolution. We're moving into section 3, which deals with how did Darwin actually present his research? How did he present his case for the idea of evolution? So Darwin's work, what he did is, when the Beagle landed, he started to meet with other scientists, kind of comparing his information, looking at the species that he collected, trying to gather as much other information about how did these results compare to the results from other, birds, turtles, that type of thing elsewhere in the world. He started writing down all of his ideas in notebooks, really trying to flesh out how the variety and diversity of species came about and the process that was really behind this. Again, this process we know today is evolution, but in these notebooks, he really tried to use the information not only from his work, but from work before to try and put some kind of semblance to what was happening and why is there such a variety, why is there some species on specific in specific locations that are not in other areas. How come things look similar, things are different, all of that type of thing. So he kind of put all of his work into this manuscript, this Origin of Species. 23 years later is when he actually published this work. So why did it take so long? Obviously, there was some research on the back end of his trip, but you have to think about what the kind of thought process was when he came back and what the scientific beliefs were of that day. And his book really kind of challenged some of those beliefs, and not only the scientific community's belief, but kind of the social, the rest of the world as well. These kind of were directly against some of the what the rest of the world believed. So whether it was that, whether it was he was concerned about some of the criticism from the other scientists, it's hard to say. But he put his manuscript on a shelf and kind of told his wife, hey, you know what, if I die, make sure you publish this. So he needed a little bit of a push to kind of get his ideas out into the world. And again, I just want to reiterate the fact that he used all of the principles from all these other scientists and included in this work. And so his work didn't get published until 1859. And the little spark that kind of pushed him there was he received a paper from Alfred Russel Wallace, who was doing kind of similar work in Malaysia. And it kind of summarized some of his ideas about evolutionary change. And this kind of sparked Darwin to say, you know what, I'm having some other people starting to have similar results. So at that point, he published his work, and he actually included some of Wallace's stuff in there as well. And again, even the fact that it was 23 years later, some people thought his ideas were brilliant and made sense, but he still did get backlash from that. Some strongly opposed his message, and again, it goes with that whole idea of what the scientific and the thinking was at the time about species and their origins and that type of thing. What did he actually do? Well, in this book, Darwin focused on kind of a couple of topics: inherited variation and artificial selection, and then evolution by natural selection. And from this, he was able to really do two things. He was able to establish the idea of evolution, the definition, again, which later has been kind of proven. And he also hypothesized the actual mechanism that explains how populations change through time, and used his research to kind of confirm it. this whole idea of natural selection as being the main component of how does evolution actually occur. So let's take a look at some of these topics that he focused on. This inherited variation, artificial selection. Artificial selection is where nature provides the variation and humans have selected those variations that we feel are useful. And we use this kind of genetic information to do many things. For instance, grow better crops, larger animals, faster horses, cows that produce more milk. So what has happened is there's been some type of variation. Maybe a farmer way back in the day had 2 cows, and one of the cow was just bigger than the other. So that's the one that they're going to breed if they're looking for the size of the cow. So they would try and breed that with, maybe the neighbor's cow that was big too, to try and get that bigger size. Versus if they had a little scrawny one, they're probably not going to want to breed that one if they're looking for size. So this has been done over and over, and that was being done kind of at that time as well. We look at, just different animal breeding, what type of crops we use, that type of thing. And it's all based on this artificial selection. So there has been some type of variation that has been passed down, and we've kind of clued in on wanting that variation. So that's the one that we're going to kind of continue to make sure that we kind of breed on. So that's this idea of that there's some type of inherited variation, and we are artificially selecting that variation. So for instance, if we wanted a cat with really short legs, we might look for cats that have smaller legs and starting to breed those together to get the desired result. And again, this is pretty prevalent nowadays with animals, crops, just about anything that we can get use from. So what Darwin did is he kind of linked this idea of the artificial selection into how does this go in kind of the real world when humans aren't necessarily selecting what they want. How does that evolution occur with other species? So it kind of natural selection is the process by which individuals are better suited for their environment will survive and reproduce more successfully. So it's based on these ideas that those that kind of have the tools, the genes, the adaptations necessary to survive in their environment are the ones that are going to go on and kind of produce and pass those traits down. There were kind of 3 main pieces to this idea of the natural selection. We have struggle for existence, survival of the fittest, and descent with modification. So struggle for existence is really based on this idea that members of each species compete regularly to obtain food and other resources. And again, this stuff was kind of based on Malthus's idea of kind of the carrying capacity of an environment. And so because there's this competition kind of on a daily basis, the organisms that are best suited for their environment will live, and those that are not will not. And so the book kind of mentions this idea that the predators that are faster and able to attract their prey more easily are the ones that are going to live when resources are scarce, and those adaptations and stuff that they have are going to be passed on to their offspring, versus the other ones that were maybe not as fast or didn't have those kind of adaptations are not going to be able to pass on their genetic information to others. And this doesn't just have to do with those being bigger or faster. Think about the prey. What type of characteristics prey need to be successful and survive. So whether it's camouflage, whether they're fast as well, whether they're small and they can hide and if they have other things that they can get out of reach of predators, that type of thing. So this whole idea of struggle for existence gives us the kind of starting point for natural selection. Survival of the fittest. And when we talk about fitness for specific organisms, we're really looking at the ability to survive and produce offspring. The fitness deals with the ability to produce offspring. So an organism that can live for 200 years but does not produce any offspring has a really low fitness level because they don't have that ability to pass on their genetic information. Versus an organism that maybe only lives for a couple of days, like specific insects, but are going to reproduce very rapidly, possibly producing millions of eggs, they have a much higher fitness level. So fitness is based on this idea of reproduction. So the survival of the fittest, individuals that are better suited to their environment, that have adaptations that enable them to survive and reproduce that fitness level most successfully, this is what Darwin calls the survival of the fittest. So the ones that have those adaptations and are able to reproduce are going to kind of live and pass on these genetic traits. So not necessarily the strong that are going to survive. Again, we look at the different traits that make things able to live in their environments. We look at kind of back to Darwin and when he analyzed some of the fossil records and recognizing that, some of these animals were getting smaller. So it's not necessarily size or strength, it's their ability to survive and reproduce in their specific environment. Sometimes it's better to run and hide than attempt to be strong and fight. So the fittest really has to do with their ability to live in the environment. Adaptations. We kind of already had this idea of different adaptations, different things, any type of inherited characteristic that is going to increase the survival of an organism. These will allow organisms to be better suited for their environment so they can find more food, have more offspring, that type of thing. These can include an organism's physiological processes or the functions as the way a plant performs photosynthesis, maybe how efficient they are. So we have the physiological process and also, the organism structure themselves. So thinking about, different structures that make them more, make them better suited for their environment. It can also be the way that animals kind of hunt in packs together, because that's kind of adaptation as well. But adaptations are really anything that is going to help an organism survive. So we look at kind of some of the different adaptations we have here. Camouflage, so the actual appearance for that. Just kind of looking at all the different things, and we'll get more into this. We'll kind of do some activities with a different type of adaptations that are going to help make an animal better suited for their environment. And kind of the last piece of this was the descent with a modification. And over time, natural selection results in changes in the inherited characteristics of a population. And these changes increase a species' fitness in its environment. And so the descent with modification is after these inherited characteristics change over time, they may produce organisms with different body structures, have different niches, or live in different habitats. So the whole idea here is after all of these kind of changes over time, you might get something that's kind of very different from what we originally started with. So the idea here is natural selection doesn't necessarily grant organisms what they need, but through natural selection, the environment is picking out the traits that are most suited for survival, and those are the traits that are being passed on through the generations. Here ends the video notes for Chapter 15, Section 3, Part 1.